A dirty kid walked into the most exclusive bank in the city. "I just want to check my balance," he whispered. The millionaire banker burst into laughter. But when the screen lit up, his smile froze forever. The morning sun reflected off the glass towers of Manhattan's financial district, casting golden light on a world that Marcus had only ever seen from the outside. At 12 years old, he had learned that there were two types of people in this city: those who belonged in buildings like these, and those who cleaned them after everyone else went home. Today, for the first time in his life, Marcus was about to cross that invisible line. His sneakers, 2 sizes too big and held together with duct tape, squeaked against the marble floor as he pushed through the heavy revolving doors of Blackwell and Associates Private Banking. The blast of air conditioning hit him like a wall, so different from the summer heat outside where he'd spent the last 3 hours working up the courage to enter. The lobby was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Marble columns stretched 30 feet high, supporting a ceiling decorated with what looked like real gold. Crystal chandeliers, each probably worth more than his entire neighborhood, cast a warm glow over leather furniture that seemed too perfect to actually sit on. Everything smelled expensive, a mixture of fresh flowers, polished wood, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Money, maybe. Success. Belonging. Things he'd never known. Marcus clutched the worn envelope in his pocket, feeling the edge of the bank card inside. His fingers were dirty. There hadn't been running water in his building for 3 days, and he was acutely aware of the smudge of dirt on his face that he'd tried and failed to wash off at a public fountain that morning. "May I help you?" The voice came from a woman behind a sleek reception desk. She was looking at him the way people in this part of the city always looked at him, like he was something unpleasant that had accidentally wandered in from the street. Marcus's voice came out as a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I need to check my balance." The woman's perfectly painted eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm sorry, young man, but this is a private banking institution. Perhaps you're looking for the branch bank down on—" "I have an account here," Marcus interrupted, immediately regretting how desperate he sounded. "I have a card." He pulled out the envelope with trembling hands, extracting the black card that had arrived in his mailbox 6 months ago. He'd been too afraid to use it until now, too afraid that it might be some kind of mistake that would get him in trouble. But yesterday, when Mrs. Chen from the corner store had told him she couldn't give him any more food on credit, he'd realized he had no choice. The receptionist's expression shifted from disdain to confusion as she looked at the card. It was clearly from this bank. The logo matched. But Marcus could see her struggling to understand how a kid who looked like he'd been sleeping under a bridge could possibly have an account at one of the most exclusive banks in New York. "I see," she said slowly, her tone suggesting she saw nothing at all. "Well, you'll need to speak with one of our account managers. If you'll just wait over there." She gestured to a seating area, but Marcus barely heard her. His attention had been captured by the man striding across the lobby like he owned it, which, according to the nameplate on the massive desk he was approaching, he basically did. Richard Blackwell. Even Marcus, who knew nothing about banking, had heard of Richard Blackwell. His face was on billboards across the city, always with that same confident smile that said he'd never known a moment of doubt or hardship in his entire life. At 45, he was considered one of the most successful private bankers in the country, managing portfolios for celebrities, tech moguls, and old money families who'd been rich since before the American Revolution. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's mom used to make in a year. His shoes were so perfectly polished that Marcus could see the chandelier reflected in them. His silver hair was styled in a way that looked casual but clearly wasn't. And his watch, Marcus had seen enough luxury watches in store windows to recognize a Patek Philippe, could have fed every kid in his building for a month. Richard Blackwell was everything Marcus wasn't. Powerful, respected, untouchable. And he was staring directly at Marcus with an expression of amused disgust. "Janet," Richard called to the receptionist, his voice carrying across the lobby with the easy authority of someone who'd never been ignored in his life. "Is there a reason we're allowing street children into the building? I thought we had security for this sort of thing." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Around the lobby, other clients, all dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses, turned to stare. Marcus felt his face burning, a mixture of shame and anger that made his eyes sting. "Sir, the young man claims he has an account." Janet began. An account? Richard's laugh was sharp and cruel. Look at him, Janet. He's got dirt on his face and his clothes look like they came from a dumpster. The only account he's familiar with is probably the one his parents opened at the local liquor store. More laughter rippled through the lobby. A woman in a pearl necklace covered her mouth with a manicured hand, her eyes sparkling with mean delight. A man in a three-piece suit shook his head, muttering something to his companion about the neighborhood going downhill. Marcus wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, push back through those revolving doors and never come back. He'd been stupid to think he could belong here even for 5 minutes. He'd been stupid to think a card in an envelope could change anything about who he was or where he came from. But then he thought about Mrs. Chen's apologetic face. He thought about the eviction notice on his door. He thought about his little sister, Emma, who'd asked him that morning if they'd have dinner tonight, and the way his stomach had twisted when he'd had to tell her he didn't know. He thought about his mother. "I have a card," Marcus said again, louder this time. His voice shook, but he forced himself to step forward, to walk across that perfect marble floor toward Richard Blackwell's desk. "I just want to check my balance." Richard's expression shifted from amused to irritated. Clearly, he'd expected Marcus to run away crying. The fact that this dirty kid was actually approaching him seemed to offend him on a personal level. "Security!" Richard called out, but held up a hand when 2 uniformed guards started moving toward them. A new expression crossed his face. One Marcus couldn't quite read. It looked almost like curiosity. No, not curiosity. Something more predatory. Like a cat that had found a mouse and decided to play with it before the kill. "Actually, wait," Richard said, a slow smile spreading across his face. This could be entertaining. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers in front of him. "Come here, boy. Let's see this account of yours." Marcus walked forward on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. He could feel every eye in the lobby watching him, judging him, finding him lacking. His 2 big sneakers seemed impossibly loud against the marble. The envelope in his hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. When he reached Richard's desk, he had to look up to meet the banker's eyes. Richard was still smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to enjoy themselves at someone else's expense. "Let me guess," Richard said loudly enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "You found this card in the trash? Or maybe you stole it from someone's mailbox? That's a federal crime, you know. I could have you arrested right now." "I didn't steal it," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It came to my apartment. My name is on it." "Your name is on it," Richard repeated mockingly. "And what might that name be? Should I be expecting a trust fund baby hiding under all that dirt?" "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Chen." Richard's fingers flew across his keyboard, his expression one of exaggerated patience, like a parent humoring a child's ridiculous story. "Marcus Chen," he repeated. "Well, let's see what we find, shall we? I'm sure this will be fascinating." The typing seemed to go on forever. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Around the lobby, people had stopped even pretending to mind their own business. They were all watching, waiting to see this poor kid get exposed as a thief or a liar or whatever Richard Blackwell decided he was. Marcus's hand went to his pocket, touching the only other thing he always carried, a small, worn photograph of his mother. She was smiling in the picture, back before she got sick, back when she still believed that working 3 jobs might somehow be enough to build a better life for her kids. She'd been wrong about that. But maybe, just maybe, she'd been right about something else. Richard's fingers stopped typing. His eyes locked onto his screen, and for just a fraction of a second, Marcus saw his confident expression flicker. It was barely noticeable, just a slight widening of the eyes, a tiny tightening around the mouth, but it was there. Then the professional mask slammed back into place, and Richard's smile grew even wider. "Well, well," Richard said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "It appears you do have an account, Marcus Chen. How about that?" He paused dramatically, milking the moment for all it was worth. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a genuine client among us. The account shows a balance of—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes returning to the screen. This time, the flicker of surprise lasted longer. His smile froze on his face, taking on a slightly strained quality. "The balance shows—" Richard tried again, but his voice had lost some of its mocking certainty. Marcus watched as the banker's face went through a series of rapid changes. Confusion, disbelief, shock, and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "That's impossible," Richard whispered, so quietly that only Marcus could hear. "That's absolutely impossible." Richard Blackwell had seen many things in his 23 years of private banking. He'd watched tech entrepreneurs become billionaires overnight. He'd seen old fortunes crumble and new ones rise. He'd witnessed the kind of wealth that most people couldn't even imagine. The kind that existed in a completely different reality from the world where normal people worried about rent and groceries. But he had never, not once in his entire career, seen anything like what was currently displayed on his screen. The number didn't make sense. It couldn't be real. It had to be a glitch in the system, some kind of error that would be corrected as soon as their IT department noticed it. Because there was absolutely no possible way that this dirty kid standing in front of him, this child who looked like he hadn't had a decent meal in weeks, could have that kind of money in an account. "There seems to be a technical issue," Richard said carefully, his professional mask firmly in place despite the chaos in his mind. "The system is showing, well, it's clearly displaying incorrect information." "What does it say?" Marcus asked, his voice small and uncertain. Richard looked at the boy, really looked at him for the first time. The dirt on his face wasn't just smudge marks from playing outside. It was the kind of dirt that accumulated when you didn't have reliable access to clean water. His clothes weren't just old or unfashionable. They were literally falling apart, held together with visible repairs. The duct tape on his shoes wasn't a fashion statement or even a temporary fix. It was a permanent solution to a problem that couldn't be solved any other way. This was a child living in real poverty. The kind of poverty that Richard had spent his entire life insulated from. The kind he'd maybe seen in documentaries but never had to personally confront. And according to the screen in front of him, this child had an account balance of $47 million. "Janet," Richard called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you come here for a moment, please?" The receptionist hurried over, her heels clicking against the marble. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell? I need you to verify something on your terminal. Look up the account for Marcus Chen." He spelled out the account number, watching her face carefully. Janet's fingers moved across her keyboard with practiced efficiency. Richard saw the exact moment when she found the account. Her eyes went wide, and all the color drained from her face. "Sir," she whispered, leaning close so only he could hear. "The balance shows?" "I know what it shows." Richard cut her off. "The question is whether you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing, or if this is isolated to my terminal." "It's the same," Janet confirmed, her voice shaking slightly. $47.3 million. Last deposit was 6 months ago. No withdrawals. No activity of any kind since the account was opened. Richard's mind was racing. This had to be some kind of money laundering operation. Or maybe the account belonged to the kid's parents, and they were criminals who'd set up the account in their son's name to hide assets. That had to be it. There was no other logical explanation. "Marcus," Richard said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I need you to be very honest with me. Where did you get this card?" "It came in the mail," Marcus said. 6 months ago. There was a letter with it." "A letter from whom?" "From my mom." Marcus's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Before she died." The lobby, which had been buzzing with curious whispers, fell suddenly silent. Richard felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest, something that might have been shame, though he quickly pushed it away. "I see," Richard said carefully. "And your mother was a cleaning lady," Marcus said, lifting his chin slightly in defiance of the shame that Richard was clearly expecting him to feel. "She worked 3 jobs, sometimes 4. She cleaned offices at night, worked at a laundromat during the day, and did whatever else she could find." That made even less sense. A cleaning lady with $47 million. Unless... "Marcus, is it possible your mother was involved in something illegal?" Richard asked, trying to sound diplomatic rather than accusatory. "Sometimes people in difficult financial situations make choices that—" "My mom wasn't a criminal," Marcus said sharply, with more force than he'd shown since entering the building. "She was the best person I ever knew. She worked herself to death trying to give me and my sister a better life." Richard noticed the other clients in the lobby shifting uncomfortably. The woman with the pearl necklace who'd been laughing earlier was now staring at her shoes. The man in the three-piece suit had turned away, suddenly very interested in his phone. "Of course," Richard said smoothly. "I didn't mean to suggest, look, why don't we move this conversation to somewhere more private? Janet, can you escort Mr. Chen to conference room B? Actually," a new voice cut in, "I'll take it from here." Richard looked up to see James Morrison, one of the bank's senior account managers, striding across the lobby. James was 63, had been with the bank for over 30 years, and had a reputation for being both extremely competent and completely unimpressed by Richard's usual theatrics. "James, I'm handling this," Richard said, trying to inject authority into his voice. "No, Richard, you're making a scene," James replied calmly, "and you're about to make a very serious mistake." He turned to Marcus with an expression that was actually kind. The first kind expression the boy had seen since entering the building. "Hello, Marcus. My name is James Morrison. Would you mind coming with me? We can sort all of this out in a more comfortable setting." Marcus looked between the two men, clearly unsure who to trust. Finally, he nodded. As James led Marcus toward the elevators, Richard felt his control of the situation slipping away. He stood up quickly. "James, I really think I should be present for—" "You've done enough," James said without looking back. "Stay here and attend to your other clients. I'll handle this." Richard watched helplessly as James and Marcus disappeared into the elevator. Around him, the lobby was still silent. Everyone had witnessed his humiliation of a 12-year-old boy. A 12-year-old boy who apparently had more money than most of Richard's regular clients. He sat back down at his desk, trying to regain his composure, but he could feel the stares, could sense the judgment. For the first time in years, Richard Blackwell felt something he thought he'd left behind in his childhood. Shame. Upstairs, in a comfortable conference room with soft lighting and furniture that actually looked inviting, James Morrison was making Marcus feel something he hadn't felt since entering the bank. Safe. "First things first," James said, pouring Marcus a glass of water from a pitcher on the table. "Are you hungry? I can have someone bring up some food." Marcus's stomach growled audibly, answering the question. He nodded, embarrassed. James picked up the phone and ordered sandwiches, fruit, and cookies. "Enough for 3 people, he specified, even though there were only 2 of them in the room. When he hung up, he settled into the chair across from Marcus with a gentle smile. "Better?" he asked. "Why are you being nice to me?" Marcus asked suspiciously. "Everyone else here looks at me like I'm trash. Because unlike Richard Blackwell, I actually remember what it's like to have nothing," James said simply. "I grew up in the Bronx in the 60s. My father was a bus driver. My mother cleaned houses. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I only managed that because of scholarships and working 3 jobs." Marcus studied James's face, looking for signs of deception. But the older man's eyes were sincere. "Now," James said, pulling out a tablet, "let's talk about your account. I've pulled up the file, and I have to say it's quite remarkable. The account was opened 6 months ago by your mother, correct?" "I think so," Marcus said. "She never told me about it. I just got the card and a letter in the mail after she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "May I see the letter?" James asked gently. Marcus pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It had been read and reread so many times that the creases were beginning to tear. He handed it to James with trembling fingers. James unfolded the letter carefully and began to read. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression shifted from professional curiosity to deep emotion. When he finished, he had to clear his throat before speaking. "Marcus," he said softly, "your mother was an extraordinary woman." "Can you tell me what the money is?" Marcus asked. "I don't understand where it came from. We never had money. We could barely pay rent. Mom worked all the time, but we were always broke." James looked at the account details on his tablet, then back at the letter, then at Marcus. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "6 months ago, your mother came to this bank. She didn't come to the main entrance. She used the service entrance because she was here working as part of a cleaning crew. But she managed to get an appointment with one of our newer account managers, someone who was willing to listen to her story." "What story?" Marcus leaned forward. "Your mother had been saving money for years. Every single extra dollar she made went into a shoebox under her bed. She told our account manager that she knew she was sick, that the doctors had told her she didn't have much time, and she wanted to make sure you and your sister would be taken care of. Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes. But we were so poor. How could she have saved that much? She didn't, James said gently. The money in your account isn't from savings, Marcus. It's from a life insurance policy. Life insurance? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. James nodded. Your mother had been paying into a life insurance policy for over 10 years. Small payments, probably $20 or $30 a month,